Hey guys, this is a brief overview of the historical side of Christianity covered in class. Here are the key concepts you should already understand, but remember this is going to be review in case you missed something. Here's some of the key vocabulary, either from the textbook or some of the stuff we talked about in class. So we're talking about the spread of Christianity, and I like to start with this image because it's a reminder that Christianity has spread a long way. It starts in the Eastern Mediterranean, but this humongous statue is in the Western world, the Western Hemisphere, specifically Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. It's also useful to remind ourselves that Christianity's spread and success, as we can see from this modern day image, was not a foregone conclusion. In fact, there are plenty of other larger religions that have died out, larger than Christianity was before it started spreading. So it very well might have died out as a world religion if some things didn't go its way. And we're going to talk about some of the things that went its way today. First of all, let's remind ourselves of Spodek's religion's framework, right? Christianity, although it might be a personal religion for many of us, is still a religion that we can apply this framework to. So how well does it fit? Ask yourself before and after the lecture review. Alright, before we talk about the spread of Christianity, let's talk about where it comes from. This is very important to understand where it comes from, to understand why it is the way it is today. First of all, know that it's born from the Judaic tradition. Why does this matter? Why is this important? Well, it means that both religions share a couple of key beliefs. Probably the most important belief that they share is that of monotheism, belief in only one God. Some others are a day of judgment. There's also similarities in rituals. Actually, if you look down here at the image, you can actually see a tradition that developed in Judaism, the consumption of flatbread or matzo, and how that's transferred over to the Eucharist today, kind of a smaller version of what you see over there on the left. Another interesting thing about Judaism that pertains to Christianity is that many Jews believe that there was this coming Savior. Why is that important? Well, for some, Jesus was that person. They believe that he was that person. And again, we're not going to talk about whether that's the case or whether that's not the case, but the important part of that is that they believed. And that led to an increased following for Jesus early on, and allowed him to do some of the things that he does with his life, which we're going to talk about later. Speaking of things that Jesus did and said, this is one of the things that he was supposed to have said, supposed to have taught, recorded in the Gospels years later. Why is this important to take a look at? Well, it gives us some clues into why Christianity spread, and also why not everybody may have found Jesus' message appealing. Taking a look at some of the key words in this text, we notice poor in spirit is mentioned, those who mourn, the meek. I really want to focus on that. These are generally negative descriptors, right? And for a lot of people, in fact, for most people, life was not that great on earth. So we can see that Jesus' message here is really appealing to most people, the folks on the bottom of the social structure, the meek, those folks whose life might not be going that well. It's important to note that this message, while appealing to folks who are on the bottom of the social structure, might have been kind of scary to those folks at the top. Because if the meek, those on the bottom, are supposed to inherit the earth, what does that mean for those on top? Well, Jesus, as we're going to see in a second, is supposed to have preached that it's not your political power on earth, it's not your wealth on earth that makes a difference in the end. It's your spirituality. And like I said before, that was kind of threatening to folks on top of that. Leads to, unfortunately for Jesus at least, his untimely end on earth. This is pretty much just a review of what I said, taking a look at the document on the last slide. It's what historians learn from that document. So I won't talk about it, but if you didn't get that from the last page, you can take a look and get the information you need. So as I alluded to in the past couple slides, Jesus' message was pretty threatening to the folks in power. That's religion kind of threatening politics, right, or political power. And the folks in power, namely Roman officials, decided they were going to go ahead and eliminate this threat by having him killed. Of course, if you know the story, that's not really a move that works out in their favor, right? And why that is kind of has to do more with religious belief than anything we can prove historically. Again, belief is still important because it does lead to historical action and consequence. So I'm not going to judge whether the belief is true or not. Historians don't make that call, but we are going to talk about the effects of the belief. Anyway, as most of you guys know, Jesus is killed. The belief among Christians is that he is resurrected and ascends to heaven. Why is that important? Well, because that adds to his credibility among his followers. If this person is in fact divine, then probably someone worth following, right? So that's the belief and the impact of the belief as far as Christianity is concerned. It helps Christianity to spread because folks like this, Paul, came to believe that as well, and that belief led them to take action and work very, very hard on Christianity's behalf. It's important to note two things before we leave this slide, though. One is that Christianity really doesn't become Christianity until after Jesus' death and the followers start calling themselves Christians. It's one of those labels that is attached to that belief in a resurrection and all that. The other thing is that Christianity's teachings were in dispute after Jesus' death, and a lot like other religions, new teachings are added and worked out over time after the death of the founder. We're going to see that's common to Buddhism, Islam, and Christianity, among other religions. So it's a mistake to think that all of the teachings of Christianity that people hear about today were taught by Jesus, because a lot of those teachings were added on later on after his death. Here are some examples. It's also important to note that historians still kind of debate what it is or was that Jesus actually taught during his lifetime. Those teachings are recorded in the Gospels, but there are some problems with those texts as far as historical accuracy. One of the problems is that those books were written down decades after Jesus' death. So they're very often not first-hand accounts of what happened. They're also written down by sources other than Jesus, so their perception of the teachings might be different. Another issue with the documents, if we're looking at Soapstone, is what could these writers have been trying to accomplish? What could have been their purpose in portraying the teachings the way they were? If their purpose is to spread Christianity, perhaps they made the teachings more appealing to the masses than Jesus' original teachings were. Again, that's just historical speculation because we don't know exactly what Jesus' original teachings were. The Gospels are just our best guide. But there were many Gospels, some that were accepted by the church, some that were not. And it would be nice if we had Jesus to review those Gospels for us and tell us where the folks got it right and where they got it wrong, but seeing as he wasn't around to do that at the time, we just have to go with what was accepted. But there's some questions among historians about whether the church accepted the Gospels that were truly the closest to what Jesus said, or whether that was not the case. In any event, Christianity, or at least the form of Christianity that came to dominate under the primary four Gospels that were accepted, begins to spread. What are the reasons for that? Well, there are plenty, actually. We already talked about the appealing message. Trade routes are very important because it's during the Roman Empire that the message first starts to spread, especially around the Mediterranean. And even though, as many of you guys know, the Roman Empire didn't necessarily want Christianity to spread, it was difficult for them to stop, especially when it used the infrastructure that the Romans themselves had built. Another thing that empires do is they establish linguistic uniformity, right? And Rome had two major languages that pretty much everybody knew. There was Latin in the west and there was Greek in the east. So transmitting any idea, including a religious one, was a lot easier if there was an empire to help you do it. And Rome, once again, was that empire. Of course, there have to be people who are willing to do it and are dedicated to the cause. And Christianity had those people, again, because of those strong religious beliefs. An example might be Augustine, known by some as Saint Augustine, who was able to connect Christianity to popular Greek philosophy to help people in the eastern part of the empire, as well as North Africa, where Greek philosophy was also popular, help those people understand the religion in terms they could relate to. Much like Buddhists over here off the map from India helped the Chinese understand Buddhism using Chinese philosophy. Very much the same principle. And of course, it also helped that eventually, and this is a long eventually, hundreds of years after Christianity starts spreading in the Roman Empire, but eventually the Roman officials in charge, Constantine and then a later Roman official, the emperors gave official support to the religion. First they made it legal, then they made it the only legal religion. So that certainly encouraged conversion from any other religions to Christianity. What themes are we talking about here? Well, 2 is religion, right? 3 is the empire, helping the religion to spread. And 4 is going to be that economic element that the empire uses. It also helps it to spread. Of course, Christianity shares some other similarities with other religions we've talked about, like Buddhism, and ones we will talk about, like Islam, that happen throughout its history. One is that it splits into sects, right? Buddhism did that with Theravada and Mahayana. Islam, as we'll see, will do that. How did Christianity do that? What did it look like? Well, it's important to remember that the religious split actually begins with a political split. So that's theme 3 impacting theme 2. And the Roman Empire, if you can recall that far back in Spodek, was actually divided into 2 halves near its end. There was an eastern half and there was a western half. And that traditional date that's given for the fall of the Roman Empire by many historians really is only the breakup of the western half. There was still a very strong eastern half with its capital in Constantinople until about 1,000 years after the fall of the western half. But the fall of that western half led to some political distance between Rome, the former capital of the western half, and Constantinople, the capital of the eastern half. It was controlled by different people now. They were no longer unified. And so over a process of hundreds of years, what happens is there's kind of a lack of communication. There's cultural isolation between those two cities. And Christianity, since it had already spread to those two cities, remains there, but it develops differently in each one of those cities. And eventually, the Pope, who is a leader of the church in the West, in Rome, and the Patriarch, the religious leader of the Christian church in the East, in Constantinople, eventually get so far apart in their religious beliefs that there's this big squabble over religious doctrine, and they wind up kicking each other out of the Christian church. It doesn't seem like a big deal, but if you're a believer that you have to be a member of the church in order to have your soul saved and go to heaven and all that fun stuff, it was really a big deal. Because essentially what each of those leaders was saying is that the entire other half of Christianity and its followers were not true followers, and that they were not going to heaven after their death. So that's kind of a big deal, right? So here's a little Venn diagram that shows you guys some of the similarities and differences between the Roman Catholic Church in the West and the Eastern Orthodox Church, obviously in the East. These four up here are a bit more important than the differences down here, and this similarity right here is probably the most important of them all. Let's take a look at some of the differences first. In the West, led by one person, that's going to be your Pope. In the East, led by the Patriarch, but he's not really in charge to the same degree that the Pope in the West is. Because really there's a committee of religious leaders in the East that aid and advise the Patriarch. And the Pope, well, he has cardinals, if you're familiar with Catholicism, really not as much power in those people's hands than there is in a council that advises the Patriarch. What does this lead to? Well, it means that with the power concentration over here, the Pope can exercise some of his concentrated power over the political rulers of the area. Also, notice this says rulers over here, plural, right? As opposed to the single ruler that really existed in the East. Since there were lots of different rulers in the West, their power politically was fragmented. So the Pope was able to control them a lot easier. There's really only one ruler in the East. I know it says rulers over here, but the ruler, the emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire, or the Byzantine Empire, had a lot more power concentrated in his hands. So the one with the concentrated power is really able to control the one without the concentrated power in both of these cases. Pope has concentrated religious power. The kings had fragmented political power. Therefore, religion dominates politics. Over here, the Patriarch had fragmented religious power. The emperor of the Byzantine Empire had more concentrated political power. Therefore, it's politics that dominate religion. What's important about the similarities? Well, they're still based on some of the same core teachings, basic Christian teachings, teachings of Jesus, and they have their own hierarchy. But most important is that they seek new members. Both of them do. And this, as we're going to see in a second, leads to competition for converts. That competition can breed good consequences or negative consequences, depending on the place and time. An example of a negative consequence would be the Crusades. We think of Crusades as Christian versus Muslim battles, but actually, in many cases, it was the Roman Catholic Church sending armed personnel east and they would oftentimes stop and massacre and plunder the locations where the Eastern Orthodox Church was a big deal. So it's Christian versus Christian violence there. That would be negative competition. In a second, we'll talk about positive competition, though, what it can do. Before we get there, though, quick fast forward to today. Eastern Orthodoxy right now is a big deal, as you can imagine, in the east of Europe, right, rather than the west. Geographically, we'll see why that is in a moment. Maybe you recognize these pictures. These are both examples of Eastern Orthodox architecture in Europe. Looking at this map, I think it becomes a little bit clearer what's going on here. There's competition, remember, between Constantinople and Rome for converts. Okay, where are they going to first look for converts? Well, closer to them, right? So Eastern Orthodoxy diffuses north into Eastern Europe and Russia. Roman Catholicism diffuses north into Central and Western Europe. Along this line here, there's still a lot of religious tension between those two sects of Christianity. Alright, I promised you guys we were going to talk about the positives of competition, and that's what we're doing here. We're going to kind of end on a positive note. This is an example of one of the positive legacies of the Eastern Orthodox Church in Eastern Europe. If you guys don't recognize this, this is what's called the Cyrillic alphabet, named after the guy who created it. And the guy who created it was actually a Eastern Orthodox religious official. Why did he create this alphabet? Well, the people he gave it to, the Slavic peoples of Eastern Europe, actually didn't have a written language. And it would be nice for us to think he just, did this to be kind, but remember, writing is one way that you can transmit information without actually being present to do that yourself. And even today, we can think of examples of that. You're walking through the hallways or out in the public areas, somebody hands you a pamphlet or a flyer, right? They're too busy to speak to everyone, but they give you something that you, they hope, will share with somebody else, and that information will diffuse. Well, what the Eastern Orthodox Church, as well as the Roman Catholic Church, was trying to do, remember, is diffuse information. Information about their version of Christianity to try to get new converts. So, a written alphabet for folks who didn't have one makes a whole lot of sense. You can put the Bible in your own words, and you can get the Eastern Orthodox version of biblical events and have that transmitted to you if you have that written language. But the good news is Cyrillic today is used for way more than just religious communication. It's used for communication in general in Eastern Europe. And that's it. Thanks for watching, guys.